This is the Balanced Growth Show with Dr. Travis Perry, helping successful business professionals like you achieve balance in their lives.
Welcome to another episode of the Balanced Growth Show. I'm your host, Dr. Travis Perry. Today, it's my privilege to be able to interview Todd Brand. Todd is a second-generation leader of a 20-person team, helping 250 plus affluent families succeed over generations within their life, business, family, and wealth. They provide fee-only counsel to include the provision of both estate and tax services for clients over 3 million so desiring. And a specific note, since purchasing this company, Todd and team have grown it by 8 times. Todd, welcome to the Balanced Growth Show.
Thank you, Dr. Perry. I'm married to a doctor, so.
Well, that's good. You can call me Travis the rest of the show. I appreciate that.
All right.
People ask me all the time, what do I call you? I'm like, well, you can intro me as doctor, but after that, I'm good with my given name. But this is about you, Todd. I'm really impressed with what you've done. I'm impressed with the scale of which you've grown your financial planning practice. Entrepreneurs are always searching for a way to better grow and to keep that balance. So let's talk a little bit about how you got here. How did you get to this position of business owner for your firm?
As a young man, I was at Baylor University going into pre-med in 1986. And in the first year of pre-med, when exposed to other people's blood, I would pass out. And I couldn't get over it. No matter what I tried, I couldn't get over it. But I had a heart bent on being a physician. So partway through my freshman year, I elected to move over to business, believing that it had the same diagnostic and prescriptive elements of it. It made you feel to help someone like this, makes you feel comparable, I would guess, to how someone might feel doing something else in medicine. So starting there, I graduated in 1990 and interviewed 7 times for a position in Dallas, Texas, in a really nice office of an insurance company, which masked itself as a wealth management or a financial planning resource for me. So after 7 interviews, I started on, I think it was like the 20th floor. And on the first day I quit. And I quit because they asked me to take my fraternity handbook, take the names of all my fraternity brothers, call them, get their parents' name and number, and then offer to do a life insurance quote on them. And when those commissions equaled the pay that they were giving me, then they would move me to straight commission, and they would let me begin to progress towards financial planning. And I called my father, who my mom, my dad, and a secretary had a small financial planning firm. And I said, Dad, this is not, this isn't what I wanted. And it's not what I thought it was going to be, because I, of course, built it up as to what I thought it was going to be. And he said, well, do you know how to do computers? Because your mom and I don't. And if you want to come here for a little bit, you can install this thing called PowerPoint and Financial Engines, which was a financial planning software. And you can run that for X dollars an hour. And I started then doing that. And one thing led to another. I shortly thereafter went back, got a master's, which he said, do it now or don't ever do it, because I'll have to replace you if you wait too much longer. And so I went and did an accelerated master's program, came back. And I guess I'm in my 32nd year now of doing just this and working, ironically, with a lot more physicians, which convinces me perfectly, you are so glad you don't like blood.
What a great story. And, opportunity. I too was in the insurance business for a while, thinking I was a financial planner. And, I lasted 4 years. You sniffed it out after one day. Touché, my friend. Touché. It's a hard gig, because so many that I've interviewed on this show have been financial planners, business owners, and there are many others in different industries, but this industry alone, just especially years ago when you and I were first getting started, kind of had that vibe. And I don't want to focus on that vibe, but what I want to focus in on is that you really have improved yourself. You really made changes, and you were able to get to where you're at today because you followed your gut, right? Now you purchased this company, you said, how many years ago?
So the full purchase happened in 2004 in March. I began that process actually in 2000. I hope I'm not misleading you. Somebody might go, Todd, that was 99 or that was 2001. But around 2000, my dad knew that he wanted to begin winding down. My dad and mom, she was office manager. He was the chief financial planner, and I washed his car and made coffee and typed stuff and filed things and did a computer. But in the 90s. But in 2000, I became president and began to acquire shares in the company. Was at 20% by 2004. And then my mom and dad took the company to market, if you will, ascertained a market value and said, if you want to try to buy this, we trust you enough, which they probably just said that, but we trust you enough, go ahead and pull the string. And so I signed a note and began that process, which completed about 2 years ago. So it was a long process to complete the buyout. But their last day, they, other than coming back as clients or to get free paper and pens, his last day was his last day.
Oh, that's a great story there. And I know, since then you've really grown this business. I mentioned that in your bio that you've grown it, or your team has grown it by 8 times. We're going to get to that. But, one of the things I want to talk about first is balance. Why is balance so important to you? Why have you made that a priority in your life as a business owner?
So that was the other thing when you asked, when I learned who you were and your materials, I had written an article for a group called Entrepreneurs Organization. You may be familiar, Young Presidents Organization, Young Entrepreneurs Organization. Now it's just, they dropped the young. But I wrote an article on a balanced entrepreneur. And the reason was, this was in 2004, I actually joined to replace to just become kind of the leader that I wanted to be. I joined that organization. And one of the early things I learned was, when asked the question, the number one answer to the question of people who own small businesses of $1 million or more on a global basis who are a part of EO, what content would you like us to bring to you this year? The number one answer every year, at that time, at least I was told, was work-life balance. I thought, well, that's interesting. If you're asking for the same content over and over and over, then it's communicating. Being a small entrepreneur doesn't allow for such. And so help us. And so I wrote an article about something that, I don't know who I stole this from, but I wrote an article, 15 years ago about, if you show me your checkbook and you show me your calendar, I'll tell you about your priorities and can help you reshape what you think is important. If you just first come to an understanding, what do I actually value? What matters to me? And where am I putting it in the stack? And that is easier to see externally than it is sometimes for us internally to acknowledge to our own selves, you know what, I'm kind of messed up right now. So that was the start of that idea. And then as a wealth advisor, and I know you've got a lot of familiarity with the space personally and through your podcast, but I tell my kids with some regularity, I have the best job in the entire world. I get to see the very best and the very worst of success, and they're not the same. And so recognizing, one of my favorite questions, if you had twice as much money, well, how's your life different? If you had half as much money, how's your life different? To just try to reveal, are we anchored too much? And this is a worldview, but if we love money that much, if money is such an important thing, and I deal in it daily, I try to acquire it, I try to grow it, I try to help people preserve it and transmit it to the next generation. I deal in money. But if money plays a role that is above other things, I want to know that. And in our role here, and in lots of people who do what we do, we get a front row seat to, you're unbalanced and you're doing it to yourself. You're doing it because whatever the number is, 5 million needs to be 10 million. If that's the number one goal, that's going to unbalance everything else. And so how can we as an organization model? If I model it, then it is a better opportunity for my team, even in the new hire process to say, you know, I'm trying to live my life before clients and before you in such a way that you would want to emulate it, not have my life, but have the pieces to it, you know, put your own signature on that. Is my, and Travis, I don't know if you believe this or if it's in your, I didn't finish your book, so forgive me. But you've seen the classic pie chart where people say, I want to be fit and I want to go to church and I want to love my family and I want to have a great job and I want to travel. And they draw that pie chart. I believe that pie chart's a lie. That pie chart never you can draw it however you want. It's never going to equal what you drew. You know, I mean, people will say, well, if you draw it, then you can aim at it. But life doesn't do that any more than, you know, my wife gets cancer in 2016. Okay, I got a new pie chart. I didn't ask for a new pie chart. So I'm either balanced before that and balanced during that and balanced after that, or I am unbalanced as a man.
Yeah.
And so what does it look like for me to be balanced at the level of who I am, so that when my pie chart's shifting all the time, I'm chronically able to adjust to, okay, this part of my life needs attention and it can't have it right now. Does that make me unbalanced? No, that means I know how to prioritize and go for right now. It's going to be unbalanced on purpose and I'm going to have joy in it rather than fight it because I don't get to play as much golf or, you know, whatever things might look unbalanced. It's a little bit, it's my encouragement to myself to remember you're balanced. You're balanced because of who you are, not because of what your pie chart looks like.
I love that. Yeah. And, you know, you mentioned something that's really important that I mentioned in the book, priorities and values, right? Where is your time spent? And I do this all the time with entrepreneurs. We track their time and look at where they're spending it, what their priorities are. And we sometimes need to have a little bit of a come to Jesus talk about, hey, here's your time spent. Here's where you say your priorities are. These don't match up. And what's going on? But I love that, you know, you're mentioning, you know, where your priorities are. That's where your time will be spent. That's what you're going to be doing. And yes, those things can change. I think one of the biggest myths of trying to achieve balance is that we think it's got to be equal. We think it's somehow, like you said, that pie chart, somehow it's got to all be equal. And I'm a big believer that no, it doesn't need to be. It needs to be prioritized. So that's fantastic. What do you think has been one thing that's helped you keep your priorities in order?
It's one thing. The first is other people. So for those of you listening who can't see my hands, if I'm to hold my hands out in an open fashion and say, this is my life, there's always a role to play for having a few people in your life that if they speak, they move you, and giving them permission to do that. And even formalizing that, hey, how do you see me right now? Whether that's my wife on, you know, Wednesday nights, if we have conversations around what's the quality of our marriage, okay, that's an opportunity to hear what you're not going to hear if you don't ask. And so the easy first answer to that would be asking other people to help me with that, because it's not natural, right? It's actually natural for me to focus on me and just me. And I can let other people's tension with me communicate to me, you're not being a good husband, you're not being a good father, you're not being a good leader, you're not being a good boss, you're not being a good advisor. I can let them communicate that through their tension, or I can seek it out in advance and say, am I being a good advisor? Very different. You get a very different. My response to my own question is better than if they ping me with, here's 3 flags I threw on you lately.
Right. No, the feedback is crucial, isn't it? And what we found is that when you get to the end of the book of Achieving Balance, it talks a lot about spouse and the support and transition of really relying on your own personal development to then relying on each other. And that's what it sounds like you've learned to rely on your spouse, getting feedback there, your team, from your leadership team. I'm hearing a lot of that. And then even asking your clients. It's fantastic feedback. And I think that's very helpful to learn and implement. As you've been able to scale your business, let's talk about this for a second. You've been able to scale 8 times what you originally had picked up, again, with your team, with your help, with their help. I know you didn't do this alone, as you mentioned. But How have you guys done this? What has really been 1, 2, 3 things that have enabled you to grow at such a great rate?
So I got to grin at you again. You know who John Maxwell is? I think it was he that said, "I feel so sorry for self-made men. They could have been so much more." And for grinning at you here, when you say grow at such a great rate, the 8 times is kind of the number from when I took over as president before I had fully bought the company, and just when I knew, okay, this is you're doing this, you're going to take over this company, and I assume responsibility for the growth thereof. That great rate is not a very staggering number. I gave you the key to it a long time ago not earlier in the conversation, when I said I've been doing the same thing for 32 years. The same thing for 32 years at a modest rate of growth that is sustainable does amazing things. And part of the answer is I haven't, just so I say it honestly, I haven't grown at anything like I feel like I A, could have, or B, should have. I've underperformed over that season and have grown tremendously anyway. But that tremendous growth did not look like we doubled and we doubled and we doubled. It looked like we ground and clawed and scraped forward and went backwards for a while and figured something out. And the annualized rate of return is achievable by anybody, I believe, who gets into this to this space. It's a great space. I'd look at you on the screen and say, this is the greatest job in the history of the world. There's nothing like it. And if you love people, you can really succeed well in it if you're not an idiot. It is a fantastic career choice. But it is a grind, because there's external forces that determine your growth, and there are internal forces, and the external forces periodically make you feel like I can't do this. I can't keep going. This is just too much. Why don't I just sell to, you name all the big companies out there trying to acquire us, and it's a big list, and that's not where our heart is for it. So the first is, something that I would give my dad more credit for this than I ever had, because he had to fight to the point of near dying, and fight to the point of near dying, and fight to the point of near dying. And by the time I took over the business, we had a significant, $100 million piece of business, and I'm trying to grow it from there. Well, like a turtle on a fence post. I had his help to get there. Now I'm trying to train the 3 young men who are my partners, and who will succeed me. You go from here. I went from there. He went from nothing. I went from there, and you're going to go from here. But it wasn't spectacular growth. It was just a spectacular result of consistent, sort of average looking, kind of double-digit growth.
Well, the thing that you mentioned there that stands out to me is the consistency, right? You've done the same thing for 32 years. When we mentioned this a little bit earlier about it's hard to find good help these days, because a lot of people, they're bouncing, they're jumping from thing to thing to thing. The fact that you've stuck with it this long, I believe that's one of your keys. And, something else that you mentioned there too about your father, really clawing and trying to grow the business, but possibly sacrificing health or, getting close to death, as you mentioned. This is a big part of what we're talking about today on this show is what your struggles might be with as you're scaling this business to not lose that balance. Talk to us there. What are some of your biggest issues that you struggled with to try to continue to scale without losing that balance?
So if you look at our business, it has 20 people putting 22 to 2,400 hours of their life every year into assisting a fairly small basket of people in 29 states. It's not 250 for your listeners. It's more like 300, but it's 250 unique families. Some of them are multi-generational, so we call each one. But say it's 300 in 29 states. 20 people doing that is a massive lift. And so when you say, what is your struggle? 100% people. If I showed you my P&L, you would go, okay, you got people and you got a little bit of rent, a little bit of paper and a little bit of insurance, but you got people. And that's the thing. And long ago in 2006, the best answer I have for myself and our team and our our team knows this, and it is actionable. But in 2006, Phil Daniels, who is another partner in the firm, he's been with me the whole 19 years. So when I took over for my dad, Phil took over for me, and we've been like this from then to now, yin and yang. But in 2006, we had, I think we were a 7-person team in 2006 in August. And the hardest 100 days that I've lived on this earth, apart from anything related to health of family or things like that, like the hardest grind I've ever had were 100 days and starting in August of 2006. And Phil and I determined at the end of that, after losing intentionally, if you will, and unintentionally, someone who was not right for the business, the best thing that we do to balance this firm, you cannot be mean and work here. You can't do it. You can be the world's best at everything. And if you destroy someone else's sense of identity with that pride, you're gone. And we have held so tightly to, and I use this with clients, and I'm sure many of your other guests do the same, but I would tell my client, you call any person on this team, take them to lunch, you're going to have a great lunch. You're going to be well honored, and you're going to think, my gosh, they're incredible. And that is the hardest part of maintaining my own balance, because as most of us know, what's the most debilitating, awful experience we have as business owners is somebody's not right and I'm too scared to do something about it, or they're not right and they affect an action on the entity that throws chaos into everybody else's world. Like, who needed that? Who needed to be moving everybody's work around, different people trying to accommodate the loss of someone? So the proactivity of saying to the people on the team, and then saying to anybody that ever interviews here, I use it, Travis, as a proof point. It's almost unbelievable. Having not had a team member cuss in about 20 years, there's not a dirty word happening in this office. And I don't say no cussing in this office, but to build a culture where people are genuinely, and I would argue in our industry, what most people come to you wanting money, and what they actually need is a little bit of love too. They just want somebody to go, you know what, you're honorable, you're trustworthy, you seem to really care about me, and I don't think it's just because I got money. That type of person, pursuing that type of person, creates balance for me to a degree, because I'm not doing the things that I think a lot of other business owners are doing, which is putting out a fire. The world's going to give us enough fires. The markets are going to give us enough fires to put out. We should work really, really diligently to not have internal fires that we're always trying to put out. That's not Pollyannish. I recognize there are challenges, but I'm gonna attribute that to the amount of work I did. Maybe this will sound self-effacing. I believe it's true. If I just sat back and watched for the last 10 years, I would be at least the same size company I am today. If I just sat back and watched and went, hey, you're doing great, keep going. You're doing great, keep going. It's a function of who you put in the roles. And my dad only had me, and I did my best, but I didn't do my best. I did what I thought at the time was my best. And now I have people on the team, like, if I had been that, oh my gosh, Dad, you'd have never hired me if you'd known Phil. It just.
Well, I think there's a lot that we can pull from your answers there. And I think people are really important to you. And that's been how you've grown, but it's also been the struggle that you've had not growing, right? Of having those people there that are super important to you. And that has been successful for you guys. And I love that. And it's so much of what I hear on this show is delegation, building a great team, having that culture. It shows up almost every time we have these discussions. What other advice would you give to entrepreneurs who are, trying to grow while keeping this balance? Now that, you've shared with us a little bit of your successes and some struggles, what advice would you give?
So you're a really good question asker. There are studies that prove this, and I will not cite them directly because I don't remember them, but I believe it, and I've seen it lived out even in our client business. So the same thing that's true of family or counseling is true for me as a young entrepreneur. If I've got a business owner client, I'm telling them the same things that someone told me, and that is there is a point at which If I asked, let's use my wife, her name is Holly. If I asked Holly, would you rather me work 20% harder for 40% more money for our family? Or would you rather me work 10% less hard and spend that time with our family? She was going to argue, as would my kids. We'd rather have a little more you than we would rather have a little more money. And as an entrepreneur, what am I reporting to the team on our monthly meeting? This is revenue growth. This is new client growth for the quarter. This is where we lost. This is where we won. I'm reporting very important things on our key performance indicators, but my key performance indicator has to be moved to Todd in total, not brand AMG, of which Todd is the owner. It's Todd in total. And so as entrepreneurs, we know that. It's easy to say it. And I do recognize that my father, if he had listened to that same advice, might have grown slower for a while. And then I believe faster, but I can't prove it, right? Because he was trying to go from somebody's got to eat food tonight and I got to go make that happen. He was coming from that place as an entrepreneur. But the gift of when our businesses become self-sustaining or viable, or they go from dependent on a person to dependent on a team, as quickly as we can, my advice would be sure that you're not getting really, really good at something you shouldn't be getting that good at. Because ultimately, right, I remember my dad telling clients, I've had a lot of clients run out of time. I've never had one run out of money. Like be sure you're getting that. So that would be one piece of advice. The other one comes from this guy, Solomon, 3,000 years ago, an old Jewish king, said, above all else, guard your heart, for out of it, all the issues of life spring. And I believe as entrepreneurs that our heart is ethereal, or, mushy as that may sound to some of your listeners. If my heart is right, everything works better in my business when my heart is right. And if I'm having bitterness with a team member, or bitterness with a client, or bitterness with my spouse, if I'm having a challenge that I am not addressing and work becomes my escape, I'm not guarding my heart. I'm actually building a wall around it, and I'm taking it to the office and I'm succeeding in the one place I can succeed, and I'm not succeeding. I'm just making more money. And that's a luxury that we have as successful entrepreneurs, fully granting, and that's why at 55, my answer is different for a 55-year-old organizational leader than a 21-year-old guy trying to start a lawn business. You need to go out and put 80 hours a weekend and outdo everybody else in the space to just build enough clientele to pay for your lawnmowers. But you're not going to be doing that when you're 55. If you're doing it at 55, it's because you're a terrible leader. So that's a couple of things that kind of jump out.
I like it. Guard your time, guard your heart. Yep. Two things that I think we all can benefit from. Appreciate your time today, Todd. This has been a wonderful conversation, interview to go deeper and to find out how you've been able to grow in a balanced way. And I know our listeners, as we're focusing on changing this direction from just focusing on balance, but how we can grow and keep this balance. This has been a really great installment. If you've liked this, share, leave a great, comment on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to this podcast, and tell us how we're doing. You can always email us here at travis@maketimeinstitute.com. Again, thank you, Todd, for being here and for being a guest on the show.
Thank you, Travis. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely. And again, everyone else, remember, till next time, live life on purpose.